Are you ready to see a plant that originally was thought to be a philodendron but has since been reclassified into a different genera of plants? This plant has got very interesting foliage and in my experience so far has been super easy to grow. Let's dive into it. Hi there, my name is Memo, this is my channel, Houseplantygoodness, and essentially it's a place where I like to geek out about my big passion. You might be able to see some of it behind me, it's tropical houseplants. So today I'm going to do a review on a plant that I have owned probably over a year now, I want to say over a year. And it is a plant that I've wanted to add to my collection for a very long period of time. Now, this is also a plant, as I mentioned at the beginning, that was originally thought to be a philodendron. So this was originally called the Philodendron Goeldii. However, it has since been reclassified and it is now the Thaumatophyllum Spruceanum. And let me show you the plant. And you can kind of see it's been growing it in semi-hydro, it's still growing in semi-hydro, but the aerial roots that I didn't realize were growing behind it, it's hysterical. For the eagle-eyed amongst you, this is an ice cream tub container to just kind of capture the water, because let me tell you something, this is a thirsty plant. But let's look into some background with this plant. So, firstly, let me show you what the foliage looks like here, and I'll see if I can add some more mature pictures. I want to see, there's one of the leaves that is starting to look a bit more like what I was looking at this a moment ago. Where is it? This one. So I think it's the newest greeny leaf, basically. So can you see through all the different foliage what that's looking like? So each one of these is one leaf. And you might be looking at it going, but there's loads of leaves on it. Those are all leaflets. So it's one leaf with multiple leaflets. But what you do get is this situation here where it starts creating a bit of a semicircle and eventually it will turn into more or less a full circle of leaves. This is so difficult to film, but you can kind of see it there. It's a very, very cool plant. And it is a plant that, as I said, I've been wanting for a very long period of time. The background on this is I know that some people can find it a bit easier, but in the UK this was not an easy plant to find. And I think this might have been a Grow Tropicals purchase. I think I found it once and it came up on Grow Tropicals and I'm just like, buy right now, because I've been looking for this for years. But you can kind of see how it grows. It's very reminiscent, less of a philodendron, and actually if you see any other Thaumatophyllums, this grows more like that. So this grows like you would imagine maybe an alocasia, where there's a central growing point. It's very low to the ground level, and then you get these large spikes coming out. So the large petioles coming out with the leaflets on top of them. And you might be seeing some damage. Where is it? I did see some damage. So there's a bit of yellowing that is happening there and a bit of burning that's happening on that leaf. It's because right behind the camera, right at the very top, this is touching the glass ceiling of my conservatory, and heat waves and sunny days have meant that there's getting some scorching from the heat and from the sun. So, but saying that though, it's done exceptionally well for me. And yeah, I'm super glad that I have got it in my collection and I finally found this plant that for me was difficult to find. Now, the one thing that I will say, and I'll correct myself up here, if I'm not mistaken, the Thaumatophyllums, most of them, tend to grow near running water. So they're not quite aquatic plants, but they do like their moisture, but they still like to have a lot of aeration, which is part of the reason why I'm growing it in semi-hydro, but I'll touch on that in just a moment. But yeah, the background on this is very interesting plant, a plant that was reclassified, and a plant that has got a structure in its foliage, whilst I try not to drop it, it's got a structure on its foliage that not a lot of other plants have. Now, coming into a speed of growth for this one, and I'll show you, it's got this newest growth point. This is such a difficult plant to film. I'm understanding now, but there's not that many videos on this. This is one of its newest leaves that's coming in, and it looks like a hot mess. Trust me, when you're in person and you're looking at this plant, it really doesn't look like a hot mess. But this is one that, at least in my experience, has been super, super fast growing. So I would say benchmarking, giving you the usual benchmarks that I would do, kind of usually against the golden pothos in my care. So if the golden pothos in my collection in the summer might grow 2 or 3 new leaves on each stem, this is growing about 1 to 2 leaves on each one of the growing points. This has got 2 growth points in the pot. And it's just been consistent, and to be fair, this is doing that even in the winter for me. It's not one that is struggling too much in the winter. It is kind of sitting at the top of a plant shelf, as I mentioned, so it's getting the best light kind of year round, possibly a bit too bright of a light in the summer months, but it just keeps on giving. It's just consistent. Super fast, probably not, but consistent growth, 100%. Now into ease of propagation, and again, full transparency here, I have not tried to propagate this. However, I will say something now for free. I wouldn't know how to. I would not know how to, because I'll bring it in so you can see it again. Can you see how close to the ground it is? And can you see some of these nodes that are happening? If I hide my face, can you see some of the nodes that are happening there? There is very little space internodally that you can kind of grow, that you can kind of capture this plant. There are nodes on there, but it's so tight on mine. I don't know with other people if they've got a much taller plant, and I have seen these where they kind of grow, that middle growing stem gets taller and taller and taller. Think again, alocasia that's been growing for years, and maybe it's lost some of its lowest leaves and you've got that corm going all the way up. This is very similar to that. At that stage, I would imagine it's quite simple to just kind of do a clean cut, take the top cutting, grow that out somewhere else. As you can see, there are aerial roots for days, and then the main growth point, I would imagine, would then sprout out. I might be wrong on this. Has anybody propagated this, and what's the success level? How have you done it? Because I'd be very curious to see how this is propagated. It might be the reason why I'm not seeing it here as often, but I'll touch on that unavailability because it's just not available that often here. And as we're touching on availability, let's dive into that a bit more, shall we? So, interestingly with this plant is the fact that, as I mentioned, could not get it here, checking for either one of the names, so either checking for the Philodendron Goeldii or searching for Thaumatophyllum Spruceanum, it was very difficult to come across this. And I'm going back a couple of years now. So as I said, last year, Grow Tropicals, where I got this from, had it, and I think I've seen this crop up in a few other retailers since then, but I don't see it super, super often. Now, based on some of the feedback that I'm getting from a lot of my audience that's based in the States, this might be one that you can find a bit more readily there. Which to me, this is the thing that makes it really interesting, because if this is a slightly trickier plant to propagate because of those tight internodal spaces, how is it being sold so readily in the States? And I don't think it's particularly expensive in America when you find this plant. So I'm curious, that's why I'm asking the question, has anybody propagated this, and how did they do it, and what success rate it was? Because I would imagine usually if something's a bit more readily available and not that kind of difficult to come by, and I don't think particularly expensive, it must mean that at least to a certain point it must be relatively easy to propagate, unless it's super easy to do via tissue culture. So that part I do not know. But it's an interesting plant because there's not a lot of houseplants generally for a lot of people's collections that are thaumatophyllums. So that's kind of cool. The name thaumatophyllum as well. So again, I'm assuming here based on breaking down the word from Greek, thauma means miracle, and phylum or philo again is the leaf. So miraculous leaf. And to be fair, you can kind of see why they're kind of saying that it's a miraculous leaf. It's probably to do with that really unusual leaf structure that is happening on this plant. And I know for some people, when it's a bit more immature like this, and I did take a browning leaf off recently just so I can show you, it probably starts to look more like other plants that you might have around, or maybe at this stage it might be reminiscent of something like a Schefflera, but it's more the more mature foliage where that kind of ring of leaflets starts to curl in and around itself that makes this truly, truly unique and very different to anything like the Schefflera. But yeah, I'd be interested to know kind of, is this a popular plant anywhere else? Is it an easy to find plant anywhere else? And again, pricing wise, when I got it, I think it was kind of mid double digits. I mean, it was a sizable plant when I got it anyway, but it was mid double digits, I think, mid to low double digits. I don't think it was particularly low in price. But I don't think, based on what some people have been saying, that this is even that expensive in the States. Have you, I'm again curious, can you find this relatively easily where you live? Is it cheap? Is it expensive? Is it less easy to find? I'm very curious to know. And coming into pests with this one, very interesting. I've not had, have I had any pest pressures on this? I don't know if I've had. And I know you might have noticed that I've got my predatory insects on here. It was more preventative rather than me having ever seen it. And I'm just like, I've never seen it, let's just put something on there just to hedge our bets. But I don't think I have ever had pests on this. And part of that might be the leaves are very kind of waxy and leathery, I guess. It's that, it's giving vibes of Monstera deliciosa, which again to me would say that, you know what, okay, maybe not so much on the spider mites side of things, but maybe on the thrips side of things, or maybe on the mealybug side of things, but I've not really ever had pest pressures on this. Do you own this? Have you had pest pressures? Because I really haven't. I can't think that I've ever had any real kind of pest pressures on this. And it's been super easy to grow whilst I try to like take off the caterpillar. But yeah, it's been super easy in terms of not having to deal with pests. That might just be my experience, but I don't think I hear a lot of people complain about pests with this one. Actually, I'll also be very curious, does any of you out there own any other Thaumatophyllums? There is a Thaumatophyllum that I really like, and it gets absolutely huge leaves, and I cannot remember what the name is. If I can remember it, I'll add it at the top there. And it was on my wish list a while back, and I've removed it from my wish list purely because I don't think I'm ever going to come across it in the UK, and it also, to get it to the size that I would want to get that plant, I don't have the space. It would need an entire wall. I can't do that. If I was living in Greece still and I could have it on balconies and stuff like that, 100% I would do that, but not viable. This one's a bit more easily manageable because it, as I said, it kind of grows a bit wide. It doesn't get massively tall. My one hasn't got massively tall. I'd be curious if anybody out there has started to get theirs to get that kind of tree-like central stem, like the kind of looks a bit like a trunk to kind of get there. But yeah, but in terms of pests, really not that bad with this one. Now, accessories and care for this one. As I mentioned earlier on, growing this in semi-hydro, and I'm growing this in the coarse semi-hydro mix from the guys at Soil Ninja. And it is growing really well. The roots are substantially chunky. I'm trying to see some of the other roots in here. This pretty much the entire summer will get a decent reservoir of water. As I mentioned earlier on, if I'm not mistaken, and I'll correct myself somewhere if I am mistaken, this is a plant that grows near waterways. So much like the alocasias and the colocasias out there, where you don't necessarily want to be growing it in swampy water, it's not a carnivorous plant, it still needs aeration, it still appreciates an awful lot of water. And to be fair, I think at the moment, I water this and fill up the entire reservoir. I think today is watering day for this. And fill up the entire reservoir. So this is a lot of water in here. Once a week in the summer. And it is bone dry at the moment. So that gives you an indication of how thirsty this plant can be. I'm curious because I've never really grown this. I've never attempted to grow this in soil. Maybe if I'd grown it in soil, it would maybe be even happier or anything like that. But yeah, have you grown this in soil? What did you find this is like if you're growing it in soil? And I would imagine if I was ever to grow this in soil, I would do the, by this point I sound like a broken record, but the Anthurium mix from Soil Ninja, just purely because it gives me everything that I need to do, especially because I'm such an overwaterer, which is another reason why I like semi-hydro, because with semi-hydro it's not impossible. I have experienced rot, because even in semi-hydro I'm a bit too liberal with the water. It's a bit less risky than it would be with soil, but actually with the Anthurium mix from Soil Ninja, and it's just very chunky mix. So the people that can't get Soil Ninja, and I think you can get Soil Ninja now in Europe. By the way, this is not sponsored. I just really love their products, and I've met a large chunk of the team now. They're all lovely, lovely individuals. But yeah, it's this one that doesn't need an awful lot of like specialist care. Does it need the semi-hydro? Maybe not. Is it happy with semi-hydro? Yes. Does it get fertilized? It gets fertilized the same as all my other plants, so kind of weekly. And it seems to be happy. This is getting some of the brightest light in my collection. I would almost say that this is getting bright light rather than bright indirect light. There is a tiny bit of like that greenhouse paint on the glass, but that is the only thing that is keeping this away from scorching light in the summer day long. Zero issues. It's not even stressing out the plants in order for the pests to kind of be attracted to this. So this is a relatively straightforward plant, but at the same time it doesn't have any issue in the winter when it gets slightly lower light levels. This just grows really nicely, and this is one of those plants that I'm just like, oh, if I still lived in Greece, this would have been a perfect balcony plant, possibly even in the garden. I don't think it would survive the winters in Greece because it can get a bit cold, but Cyprus maybe, potentially. But the water would be an issue in Cyprus because Cyprus is quite a dry country. It's very reminiscent, if you think more like Egypt than Greece at that point, because it's quite close to that part of the world. But yeah, this is one that's not very demanding in terms of its care, I find. I mean, I've got it in here purely because I want to see it on a regular basis, and this plant is still bringing me intense amount of joy. And I know for everybody it might not be like, oh, what are you going to do with this? But again, I'll remind you, the people that have been here for a while, the Anthurium eminence that I've got, the Anthurium clavigerum that I've got, the Anthurium not pendens, pedata radiatum, the Anthurium pedatum. That's the one. I still want to get the pedata radiatum at some point soon. It's just the prices are still a bit ridiculous. But anything that's got these multiple kind of leaflety type vibes, I am 100% here for. I don't know, it just reminds me of a little umbrella that you can kind of like sit underneath. I'm weird. We've established this, but very, very, very cool plant. And talking about pests, was that a pest? No, there's no pests on this plant, ever. There's no pests on this plant. I will touch wood. I don't want to jinx myself. But yeah, like so far, so good with this one. And as I keep saying, care, not fussy. Really, really not fussy. It doesn't need the humidity. I give it in here because I just want to see it on a regular basis. But other than that, it's okay. People that have been here for a while will know that I've had to put that down now because that was exceptionally heavy. That was a lot of like little rocks to be holding up for as long as I was doing. But coming into my final thoughts with this plant. So I'll start as I usually do. Knowing what I know now, if I didn't own this plant, would I be purchasing it? Hands down, blindfolded, 100% yes. Super, super easy, super much giving me joy. Do I think this is different and unusual enough for everybody? Probably not. I do love the fact that at least I can say that I've got one Thaumatophyllum in my space, because I know, and I've heard you, and everybody's kind of in agreement at this point, everybody has the Philodendrons, the Monsteras, the Anthuriums, the Syngoniums, everybody has the same type of aeroids. This is different. So this is a different genus of aeroids. It's still an aeroid if I'm not mistaken, but it's not the kind of usual suspects as everything else. So for that alone, and a whole host of other reasons, 100% I would repurchase this plant if I didn't own it, knowing what I know now. Now in terms of a score, and I'll give this 2 scores. I'll give this my personal score, and I'll give this a score that I think would probably be more relevant to everybody else, because my personal score is going to be biased. I mean, most of this is biased because it's based on my kind of opinions and experiences with this plant. But in terms of a score for me, this is a solid 9 out of 10. It's a 9 out of 10. I am really enjoying it. I'm even more so now that it's starting to get that ring of leaflets at the top. Oh, it's giving me no end of joy. It's annoying because I don't see that as often as I do because it's so high on a shelf. All I'm getting is just a whole bunch of leaves. But I don't know if anybody's ever done this, where you get a plant and you're growing a plant with the dream that one day you're going to be living somewhere where that plant specifically can live its best life, but until then it might just be a bit much for the space that you're in now. Does anybody else do that, or is that just me kind of sitting there going, you're not meant for this space, but I'm growing you for the future space that you are meant for, right? Maybe I'm not going to ask, maybe I'm weird. I know I'm weird. And I'm okay with it. I know, by the way, everybody was just like, it's okay that you're weird. I know, I'm okay with the fact that I'm weird as well. I'm old enough to not care too much now. I own the weirdness, it's fine. But the other score that I would give for this would be more of a general score. So what I would assume for a lot of people out there, the vast majority, because it's easy, because it's slightly different, because it's a different genus than the usual, and that might be a good thing and it might be a bad thing, because people might be worried going, oh, well, at least I know how to deal with a Monstera, or at least I know how to deal with a Philodendron or an Anthurium. What do I do with this? It's not that hard, I promise. I would probably give this a 7 out of 10. I don't think I'd go as low as a 6, but a 7 out of 10. It's a strong contender for a houseplant. It's different enough, at least in my opinion, to be of interest to some people. The availability might be an issue depending on the country that you're in, because you might find it super easy, where then maybe the score has to be a bit higher, or maybe you find it less frequently, I don't know. But again, to me, it would imply that if you can find it super easy in some places like America, then maybe it's also relatively easy to grow. I mean, that's not always an assumption to make, because you can find Calatheas super easy in a lot of countries. It doesn't necessarily mean they're super easy to grow. But on the flip side of that, you can find Monstera deliciosa relatively easily in most places, and that can be super easy to grow. And I think this would probably fall, I'm pointing that way because it's down, is going to be in that category more so than the Calathea category. It's going to be more in the Monstera deliciosa category. It's giving very similar-ish vibes in terms of the leaf structure and everything like that. So I would imagine this might be even an okay one, maybe when you're first starting off with houseplants, or maybe when you're starting to go a bit more into the intermediate side of things. This is a good one there. Not to say that if you're not an expert, nobody's an expert, we're all just living our experiences and trying not to mess up along the way. But if you've been doing it for a while and you're a bit more comfortable with everything, this is still potentially, I think, an interesting plant for a lot of people. So yeah, that would be my opinion on the previously known, it's got one of those things as well, it's like the artist formerly known as Prince, previously known Philodendron Goeldii, the currently named Thaumatophyllum Spruceanum. But yes, I'll be very curious to know, does anybody own this? How have you found it? Have you seen it around a bit more or less? Has this video changed your opinion on this plant? Would you like to change my opinion on this plant? Let's have that conversation down below in the comments. As always, these videos are meant to be a bit of a repository of information so that people can kind of look at it and go, yes, and this, and this, and this, and I agree with what the person's saying on the video, but I'm also agreeing with some people, what people are saying in the comments. It's going to be an information source, hopefully. But yes, hopefully you have a great rest of your day. Hopefully you've enjoyed, and I shall see you here very, very soon. Thanks. Bye.